Hi everybody, Miss McCabe here. Today we're going to talk about the Enlightenment. If you remember from last time, we were talking about the idea of the scientific revolution and how it really wanted to call in question how the natural world worked. Let's look at experimentation. Let's look at observation as a way to really understand how the world works, where the Earth is in its solar system, and all those facets of just basic understanding of the world. Well, today we're going to talk about the Enlightenment, and where we really call into question humans' place in both religion, human place in government and philosophy, and try to just better understand our relationships with each other and our ability to deal with situations with each other. So where does this begin? Well, it begins when we start thinking differently. So there are two different eras of thought that come out of this period. We have the empirical method, empiricism, the idea that you understand things through experimentation. And this is really going to be proposed by a guy named Francis Bacon. It's the scientific method in a nutshell here. All knowledge is derived from experience, generally sensory experience. Well, let's take that the next level. When you experience something, how can you make deductions to understand it, what that really means? Well, René Descartes will take the ideas of empiricism and really jump on it. Take a very general principle and make it very specific to individual occurrences. And this is the ideas you see when you start listening to stories of Sherlock Holmes, where he makes these very almost exact deductions of what happened in a situation, happened during an event, with just very general pieces of information, because he puts all the pieces together in a puzzle and is able to get the exact picture of it. And this is how people will begin to think during the scientific revolution, and then eventually into the Enlightenment. We even see a transformation of that. Well, let's go the other way. From, instead of just general principle to specific facts, let's go specific facts to bigger notions. And in human evolution, human knowledge is just changing as time goes on during this period. And people will start to apply these new methods of thinking to human interaction. One of our first people who does this, is a guy by the name of Thomas Hobbes. Hobbes is a man who lived through the English Civil War, lived through the era of Oliver Cromwell, understood the chaos that came out of that conflict, and realized that humans in and of themselves are just kind of brutish. We are violent, and we are prone to attacking one another, to being violent, and because of that, we need to find a way to mitigate our violent tendencies and passions. And he believed that one does this through a social contract. So the question becomes, what is a social contract? And we need to take a moment here and realize that there's going to be various different ideas of what a social contract is during the Enlightenment period. Hobbes is going to have his version of it. John Locke's going to have a version of it. Rousseau is going to have a version of it. All of them are tied around a basic notion that humans have to kind of agree to be willing to live together. And if we're going to be willing to do that, there's probably going to be some sacrifices along the way made so that we can live together without just murdering each other. Where that sacrifice, where that compromise is made, and over what issues is really what's up for debate. So in Hobbes' mind, the only way that people can live together in a peaceful way is if we surrender all of our rights to an absolute ruler. He looked at the violent nature of the English Civil War and realized that peace came to England when Cromwell took control. And while you may not have agreed with Cromwell's beliefs and how he ran things, time in that period was generally pretty peaceful for the English people. It reestablished order, and that was what's important. So he outlines all of his ideas in his book called The Leviathan, where the Leviathan is supposed to be an analogy for that absolute ruler, complete and total power that is beyond anything humans can really fight. And that principle of the social contract as laid out by Hobbes kind of becomes the foundational piece of modern government theory today. Because all the other various social contracts that exist are building off of Hobbes. Largely because they don't really agree with his very negative view of human nature, but it's still the foundational piece. So let's build upon it. This is an analogy that, if you remember in class, we talked about the Black Knight. Great video, have fun with it. Not going to talk about it in this video. We're going to move directly on to John Locke. John Locke is going to be the first true proponent, or at least counterpoint to Thomas Hobbes. Believes in the notion of a social contract, but his social contract is a much more positive view of human nature. He believes that inherently people are good, and while we may do bad things, it doesn't change the fact that we are good. And because we are good, we have various natural rights that no government can take away from us. For him, there were three: life, liberty, and property. These are rights granted by God to humanity, and no man has the right to take those from us. It is a government's job to protect those rights. He also believes the notion that all humans are born inherently good. We are a blank slate, his tabula rasa, and it is through our experiences that people either become good or bad, not because we are inherently predisposed to be bad like Hobbes believed, but because sometimes life deals you some pretty crappy situations and you become bitter because of that, and maybe you act out in ways that you normally wouldn't do. Lastly, the other principal piece of Locke's ideology is that a government's legitimacy derives from the consent of its subjects. If the people do not believe in the government, then the government is no longer legitimate, and therefore a new legitimate government should come to power. These ideas are tossed around really forever from here on out. The notion that a government is responsible to its people, that government's goal is to serve the people, is going to become the foundation of pretty much every Democratic or Republican government of the modern age. And they really are born out of the ideas of John Locke and his belief in natural rights. Another video about it, great. V for Vendetta, fun time about that. So, these ideas become the foundation of what we consider popular government. Other concepts such as popular sovereignty, one of the principal pieces of Jean-Jacques Rousseau's work, will come out of John Locke's belief of natural rights. And even the notions of life, liberty, and property become transformed into the Declaration of Independence that Thomas Jefferson writes upon the founding of this country. Now he changes it life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, probably due to some real questionable notions of what property is during this period of time. It would be remiss to ignore the fact that slavery is still an issue in the United States when it is founded, so using the word property there would have been real controversial. Probably one of the big reasons why Jefferson changes it to the pursuit of happiness. But you can see the foundation being laid here. And if you don't, you should search for it via the treasure map on the back of the Declaration of Independence, because happiness is there when you find it. Bad joke, moving on. Okay. So during this period of time, we also see the Enlightenment taking hold in various parts of Europe. The quote-unquote Mecca of the Enlightenment is going to be in Paris, France. It is going to be there that series of social critics called philosophes are going to gather together in salons and debate the nature of human existence. Debate government and religion and reason versus superstition and religion's role in society. All of these things are going to be tossed out there. Are natural rights real? Do people have them? Does that include minorities? Does that include women? This is just people sitting down and having conversations. Sometimes it's in a coffee house, because during the Enlightenment, coffee gets introduced to Europe and it becomes the preferred drink of the intellectuals, as it makes you sharper, more aware. Sometimes it's in the homes of people. People like Madame Geoffrine, who becomes considered the mother of the Enlightenment because she houses these tremendous salons in her home where these people come in and debate these concepts. This is what the Enlightenment is. It's a conversation. And it's sometimes historians like to portray it as very clear-cut, this great intellectual movement, but it is what it is. It's a conversation between people trying to figure out how they fit into the world. One of the most outspoken people during this period of time is a guy by the name of Voltaire. Francois-Marie Arouet is going to become the voice of the Enlightenment. And one of the reasons he becomes the voice for it, because one, he's incredibly articulate, And two, he's going to start using a new medium that is just going to radically change the political and literature landscapes of Europe, and that is satire. To him, to Voltaire, satire was the ultimate tool for the critic. Point out the hilarious stupidity of a statement, of a belief, of an ideology, by bringing it to its most farcical end. So for him, his common targets are going to be things like the aristocracy, the Catholic Church, absolute governments, really any type of institution that is going to be intolerant, that is going to believe in superstition and not reason, that is going to be prejudiced. And of course, this is going to garner a lot of criticism towards Voltaire, and it's going to get him in a lot of trouble. He will be excommunicated by the Catholic Church. He will be driven out of various countries throughout Europe, including his own native country, France. And life is a little hard for him at times, but that's because he does not hold back. And people in the Enlightenment love it. His book, Candide, is just a tremendous Enlightenment treatise on the absurdity of the world. And that's what made Voltaire so unique during this period. He was willing to kind of take the punishment that came along with it in order to point out what he believes were just absolutely stupid realities. And it begins a trend. People aren't going to hold back during this period. If there's a criticism to be had, they're going to make it. Montesquieu is going to do a critical analysis of Europe's governments. And when he does it, he starts to truly understand that, one, the size of a country matters in the type of government that it has. A direct democracy does not work in a large country. It's just not really possible. But the best form of government is one where not one body controls everything. Montesquieu is terrified of the notion that one person can become corrupt and can take away people's natural rights. So in his view, the perfect or ideal government is one where power is divided. So in his great examination of the European governments, he finds Great Britain as the ideal nation, because they divide the power between the monarchy and parliament. And even parliament is divided between two houses, and those houses have checks and balances against each other. Checks and balances that are powers that one group has against another to prevent tyranny from breaking out. So England is proud, they're excited, and we in the United States think it's dogma. We build our entire government around the notion of separation of powers, around checks and balances that are created to prevent tyranny from taking place. Critical analysis of government leads to substantial change. Building on the ideas of Montesquieu, we have Rousseau, another truly tremendously outspoken critic. It doesn't use satire generally as much as Voltaire does, but has no problem calling something crap when he sees it. For him, individual freedom is the most important aspect of human life. Depriving people of their freedom is to make us not human. We are inherently good and inherently free. That was the way God created us. So he believed in a government where people have an active voice in that government. For him, direct democracy was the ideal way to do it. It created a sentiment called the general will, where the will of the people is what a government did. Brilliant idea. His ideas of popular sovereignty, power to the people rule, are one of the foundational pieces of government in the United States, and of really any popular government around the world. His social contract is where people give up some of their freedom for the common good. And that any sort of titles of nobility, inherited wealth, and power, that should be abolished. Because those types of structures do not promote freedom. They promote inequality. So all these pieces are adding to the sentiment of what the Enlightenment is. Critical analysis for better understanding of things. Cesare Beccaria is not going to focus as much on governmental structure, but on the nature and the importance of laws and what their true purpose is to be. He believes that laws should exist exclusively to preserve social order. If they do not maintain society, then they are just an irresponsible regulation on freedom. He also believes that people inherently should be considered free and should be considered innocent until they are proven guilty of some sort of infraction that harms social order. And in that notion, because humans are limited and we make mistakes, we shouldn't have penalties that don't take that into account. So for him, the idea of a death penalty, no matter the crime, with the exception of really treason, should not exist. He also believes that torture should disappear. Cruel and unusual punishments are inhuman and an aberration to God. And then lastly, he believes that the sole purpose of government should be that the people should benefit. Whatever best helps the greater number of people should be what people do. And we've seen this idea reflected not only in our own government, in our own laws and legal system, but even in pop culture, as you can see from this wonderful clip from Star Trek, which again, not going to focus on, but watch Star Trek. And then lastly, we talk about women. Women are going to have a significant place in the Enlightenment. During the Reformation, we saw women kind of take a weird step. They're not as much viewed as an adulteress or a witch, but at the same time, they kind of get pigeonholed into the household, and that's going to frustrate a lot of women in Europe. And we see some standout advocates for women's rights. Mary Estelle believes the notion that women should have better opportunity to education and that marriages should be more equal. It's a partnership, not a subservient relationship to your spouse. Wollstonecraft is going to advocate for women being involved in almost every field that men are because they are as equally talented. Châtelet is going to really be the example that women are as equally talented, as she is considered a peer to Voltaire. Equal par, equal terms, and her ability to translate the most challenging work of the period, Newton's Principia, to French kind of shows people how women could be truly influential in society if they're given the opportunity to do so. So the Enlightenment is going to have a huge impact on things. Pretty much everything is up for grabs now. The important thing to remember, though, is the Enlightenment in and of itself was not calling for a burning down of the system and starting from scratch. It was calling for moderate reform. People realized that there were problems in the systems that currently existed, and those things needed to be addressed. They did not need to kill everyone and start from scratch to do it, though. And sometimes the Enlightenment gets misconstrued that way, because out of the Enlightenment, a series of revolutions across the world took place. But that was not the goal of the Enlightenment thinkers. That just happened to be reactionary to the events that took place in the century. So this is a pretty substantial change in European thought, in European governments and European beliefs. And it's only going to grow from here. This is just the beginning. But that's where we'll stop for today. Thanks. Oops, we're skipping that stuff for now.